Hello everyone, and welcome to the most analytical podcast in the world, House of Games. Today, dear listeners and viewers, I'm joined by my host, Otto, and a very analytical guest, Mr. Anthon. But before I allow you to analyze ourselves from the inside out, let us enter this week's episode of House of Games.
Welcome everyone to this very special episode of House of Games. So now that we have started video, we are very happy to introduce our first video guest. So I think without further ado, I will let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about what you do. So the theme for this episode is going to be about analytics and the games industry basically, and how you can leverage that. But I'm not gonna steal the topics away from you, so please just tell us who you are, what you do, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you very much for having me on your podcast. I've been listening to you guys for a while, and I think you guys are doing some great stuff out there. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I am the founder of a game analytics consultancy called Swaven Digital. And the reason why I started this consultancy is because, I realized that a lot of game studios weren't utilizing their data to its fullest potential. And I've been working in the marketing, analytics, data science space for, I'd say almost a decade. And I do also have a background in gaming myself. I used to be I'll say like a semi-pro Call of Duty player. So we did have our own esports team at one point, Frost Gaming. We competed in a few LAN tournaments. Didn't get really far. We'll probably like win the first 1 or 2 rounds and then get smoked by some top teams. So I won't say we were quote unquote famous, but I do have my competitive gaming background. So to me, fast forwarding to now, I kind of found a sweet spot between doing something that I love versus doing something that I'm good at, right? And something that is also in high demand in the market. So that's me. That's how I started. Swaven Digital, and yeah.
Your company, how big is it? You're doing it by yourself?
No. So we are a company of about 10 people. I do have a couple of colleagues that are based in the UK that do most of the client-facing stuff. Then we have teams based offshore that do more of the technical stuff.
Okay.
Right. And could you just give us a helicopter view of like what the company actually does or what you hope to achieve? So as I understand it, it has to do with some analytics and games. But to me as a layman, could you tell us a little bit more about how that connects and like what are the uses for it and what kind of data are we talking about and so on?
Yeah, of course. So basically what we do is we help game developers to make better use of the data that their game is generating, and basically leverage that data to inform, important decisions around game design, around player experience, and also monetization, right? Because, a lot of game developers, I'll say this is more true for like the smaller indie developers, like they're focusing on the building aspect of the game, right? And, data and analytics is often an afterthought. But the thing is, like, once you've built your game and you launch it, you now need to think, okay, how can I measure? How can I, track what is happening within the game, how it's performing? And how can I uncover ways to make my game better, right? That's where data and analytics comes in. And we, as consultants, we basically help game developers leverage that concept of using data to improve your game in various different aspects.
Yeah, I suppose that making a trophy list is one way of at least checking for how long people are playing your game. Because as the developer, you do have the numbers on how many copies you sold, and then I suppose you can check how many people got the platinum or one of the gold trophies that you get by completing the game. And I mean, this is all the things I have to go on, because I also make only single player games. So I'm quite curious, like, could I use these analytics for a single player game, and how does that work? Like, do I upload it to a cloud somewhere, or like, how does it work?
So for a single player game, you'd want to focus on increasing your player retention as much as possible, or even your average play time or session time as much as possible, right? So you'd want to track certain gameplay events. So let's say, if you've got an adventure game, and let's say there's a certain level where the player has to solve a puzzle to get to the next level. And let's say that puzzle was super difficult, nobody can solve it, so they end up just leaving the game and never playing again because that one puzzle is too hard, right? If you've got a good implementation that is tracking the key events of that level, you can basically pinpoint the bottlenecks of that experience and what's causing people to churn, right? So then now you can go to your developers and say, hey, we've notified that on this level, this puzzle may be a bit too hard. Can you make it a bit easier, or maybe add a bit more clues to that puzzle so people can solve it and progress to the next level? Then, therefore increasing the player retention within the game, if that makes sense.
But this would be before the game is out in that case. You said that you're trying to sort of target indie developers, for example. So this would be like for example, how would I be able to use this? Is that like I release a demo or something, like early access, and then I can get data from that?
So there's many different ways. I mean, analytics doesn't it can contribute to all parts of the game development cycle. So it can contribute in the ideation phase, where you're doing market research and trend analysis to come up with game ideas that could work. Then, in the prototyping phase, maybe when you have a demo and you give that demo to people to test, whatever data or analytics you're capturing from that testing phase can also inform your game development plans moving forward. And then, fast forward to like the launch or post-launch stages where your game is actually in live production, and you have thousands or millions of people playing your game. Using that data to also measure and inform your business decisions or game development decisions moving forward is also an application of analytics.
Interesting.
Nice. And I think this whole topic, I think, is related to like the questions that you want answered is like, how do I make my game successful? You want to get from sort of an idea to at some point you get like lots of sales, or you have some goal for what you want your game to achieve. And I think something that I find with analytics, not being like ever worked with it myself, is that it feels difficult, is like knowing which questions to ask. I mean, sure, you could like collect lots of data on everything from like how, like where a player looks, or like what buttons they press and how often and so on. But how do you know like which questions are interesting to ask? Like, is it important to know how long they're playing, or where they're looking, or like how many tries they do, or how do you know, the signal to noise ratio, so to speak? How do you know what will turn into fun or what is a red flag and so on?
So it all comes down to the measurement framework for your game, right? So what that means is, what does success look like for your game in terms of the key metrics or KPIs that you can apply your data to. So I like to group these KPIs and metrics into 7 different categories. So you've got your acquisition category, which is more focused on acquiring users for your game. So things like installs, ad impressions, cost per click, all those kind of KPIs would fall into that category. Then you've got activation, which basically covers the onboarding process of your game. So first time sessions, tutorial completions, that kind of stuff. Then you have the engagement category, and this would cover stuff like average play time, social shares, repeat users, that kind of stuff. Then you have your gameplay events, and depending on what type of game you have, this could cover things like I don't know, kills, deaths, in the COD, or it could be like race completions if you're a racing game, that kind of stuff, actual gameplay events. Then you have retention. This would cover KPIs such as daily active users, monthly active users, churn rate, all that kind of stuff. Then you have your technical category, and this would cover metrics such as uptime, crashes, that kind of stuff. Then you have your monetization category, which is the last category, and that would cover stuff like ad revenue, in-game revenue, LTV, ARPU, and those kind of metrics. So ultimately, as a game developer, it's important to establish, okay, from a KPI angle, what does success look like for my game? And basically use that framework to inform the rest of your data and analytics strategy.
I'm curious, like if I were to have an analytic thingy for my game, and the one I'm working on now, it's kind of like a Stardew Valley Harvest Moon type of thing. I can imagine that the way I would like to use it is to see how much money the players make every day, and how sort of like to balance the game, because that's one of the things I find difficult making games all by myself, is to balance them, because at the point where the game is done, you can literally play your own game with blindfolders on, like without dying, because you just played it a million times. Yet it comes out and it's super unbalanced, and people don't understand, like, how can this developer been so stupid? Like, why did he do this and that? And it's like, man, you have no idea how much I play this game. But it's my creation, so I know everything about it. So I'm thinking like to use some sort of analytics system to have that implemented in my Sunset Moon game, just to see how much money people make every day, when they buy and upgrade certain things, who they date first, and so on. It's just a demo, so it's not access to the entire game, but I feel like that would help getting a picture of how the people play the game. But so if I wanted this kind of analytic things, how does that even work? Like, do I download some software and put that in Unity, and then I make scripts that contact that analytics system, or how do you set it up?
So the most common tools that are used for analytics in the gaming space is Firebase, Unity and analytics, and there's also a tool called Game Analytics. It's called GA for short. So usually these tools would give you an SDK that you implement into your game build, and then you can instrument certain triggers that would then log custom events in these tools, and then those tools would then have like a dashboarding or a reporting interface that would visualize this data for you, so you can make sense of it, basically. That's a really high level explanation of how that would work, but yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
But nice. Then if I upload my game on, for example, Steam, and you download it and play it, how do I get the access from your computer to mine? Is it that's included in this tool, that when you save the game, for example, it sends data to some cloud service somewhere? and
Yeah,
that's
precisely.
where I fetch it from. Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. So, in the case of Firebase is owned by Google. So, the data that's being captured from your game whilst I'm playing it on my phone will be sent to Google's data server somewhere in America, I'm guessing. And then that data is then accessed by the Firebase UI, which is then being visualized to you within that platform. It's very akin to how websites track their users, right? They implement a tag on their site. And then when I go into the website, a cookie gets installed on my browser, and that cookie then feeds certain information, certain data points back to the issuer. In this case, it would be Google. So yeah, very akin to that. It's not exactly the same, but the concept is quite parallel to that.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm curious also about something related to collecting data on users that I think is kind of relevant in the public discussions nowadays, which is like ethics and stuff like that. So there are like all kinds of opinions when it comes to, for example, ethics on like collecting data on users. So we have in the EU, at least, we have the GDPR, which restricts that as well. So do you have any like input? How do you think about that as a analytics company on collecting user data? That is it something that you have to be concerned about from like a game producer standpoint, or can you just like handle it, or like sort of shuffle the responsibility over to you guys? You know how to do it like correctly and stuff like that? And is there, I imagine that you would have to have those like a license agreement where you click I agree or something before you can start playing, something like that. Yeah, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, so the whole thing about data ethics, it's an interesting one. I'll touch on the ethics part first. So in my opinion, I don't mind the companies using my data as long as they're using the data to improve the experience around their products or service,
Yeah,
right? Now, as long as the company is publicly stating how they're using their player data, and it's actually able to prove that they're actually using the data to make their game better and not just find ways to make more money, that kind of stuff, I think it's okay, right? Now, luckily for games, they like the challenge of them being able to collect data with consent isn't as difficult as it is for websites, because with games, mostly you've got an agreement that you as a player, you have to accept before you can play the game, right? So it's either you accept how we're using the data and you can play our game, or you don't accept and you can go and play another game, right? It's kind of like my way or the highway, right? Now with websites, they can, like, the user can decline the data consent, but still use the website. So websites actually have, I'll say maybe around sometimes up to 30 or 40% of sessions that they can't track because the user hasn't consented, but they still use the website, right? For games, you don't have that problem because of that sort of rule between being able to play the game and collecting data, right? So so GDPR and that kind of stuff does still apply to games, but they're not as heavily impacted by it because of the nature of having to install games and having to accept terms and conditions before you play, basically. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm curious, like when websites or Amazon, for example, collect data, the end game is to sell you more stuff. And I don't think it's a conspiracy theory that they sell data between companies and so on, so other companies get access to stuff you might want. But I suppose when you're a game analytic company who track gamers' behavior, I feel like the end goal is to make money somehow. And how does that work? Like, you then want to present this data to game companies and say, look how great we are. Use us for your next game, or how? Yeah, I guess the end goal is to make money somehow. And how does that work in this space?
Yeah, I mean, of course, the goal is to always make more money. You know, we are in business after all. But I think what companies need to be careful of is sort of applying their data in the wrong ways to only make more money. Like, in my opinion, making more money should be a byproduct of building a better game, right? So building a game that has higher retention rates, higher LTV, higher ad impressions, whatever, that should lead to you making more money from your game, and not the other way around, if that makes sense, right? So if you're using your game to if you're using your game data to uncover the areas of your game that players maybe aren't enjoying as much, or going back to my earlier example, that could be too difficult, and, you know, optimizing those parts of the game to improve the game experience, and that then leads to you making more money, then that's the right way to do it, in my opinion. Like, rather than applying black hat methods on your data just to make more money, but you're forgetting the actual user experience or user sentiment of your game, if that makes sense.
Just came to think about something now when you talked. Like, I'm not sure if there will be a question in the end of my little monologue here, but I'm just thinking, like, imagine, like, we have all these analytics tools, for example, and wouldn't that mean that at some point in the future, every game will be so bloody perfect that there are no areas where it's boring and so on? And then what would happen at that point? If we get used to that sort of elite level of attention to detail for the player, what happens then? Like, I don't know. I don't know if the question there is, what do you guys think?
No, it's definitely a good question. But so there's a balance, right? I don't believe companies should become slaves to the data. So, you know, only doing things that make your numbers look better. Like, there still is an element of human intuition that needs to be involved in the whole game development process. And also, you know, games have different audiences, right? So a game that might be perfect to one audience may not be perfect to another audience, right? And even, you know, uncovering a layer beneath that is, what does perfect even look like? Because what perfect could look like for one game studio may not look the same for another game studio, right? So, I don't think there's a danger of games becoming too perfect or becoming too like standardized. I think that may have been what you were sort of alluding to, but as long as you're using data to enhance your creativity of the game, yeah, I think that's the right way forward, right approach.
Cool.
Yeah.
And another question a little bit to that point. So I think this is really interesting, and it sort of reminds me a little bit about how some companies think about testing, like getting player feedback and all of that. So I'm curious, what's your take on what should be the role of analytics versus like player feedback, for example? So I know, for example, as one example, Valve do player testing really early in the process. So they might just start with a proof of concept level of the game mechanics, and then do player testing and then adapt according to that. So it would be interesting to know, like, what should the relationship between that be? like, are they complementary to each other, or is there some sort of like competition between the two, like talking to people versus looking at numbers and so on? So what's your take on that?
So analytics definitely complements testing, because even like within your testing session, how will you track what's happening within your game if you don't have analytics implemented within your game's code base, right? And it, another thing I'll mention is qualitative versus quantitative data. So qualitative data is more is usually more verbal, more communicative, and quantitative data is usually more numbers based, right? So depending on how you're capturing that feedback from your testing sessions, that could also in fact be another form of analytics, but it's just more qualitative, right? So if you're conducting surveys throughout your testing sessions, that's analytics. If you've got like in-game in-game scoring systems, or you can even look at like social media as well. That would be another potent source of qualitative data, because you're seeing what people are saying about your game. So yeah, to answer your question, Otto, is it complements testing and makes your testing sessions more useful, more impactful.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. And I'm also curious about the types of games that this applies to. So I imagine that there are some differences depending on the type of game that you are making, like how important it is for analytics and numbers, I imagine. So, like, for example, like in my head at least, my layman interpretation of it is like, for example, freemium games, and where like player retention is really important, or you have some sort of like earnings or stuff very tied to, for example, player retention, or clicking this button, or like clicking show an ad to get this sword, or whatever it is, that the role of analytics is more important there than it would be, for example, in, say, The Witcher 4, or whatever the next title is going to be. So what's your take on that?
So yeah, and analytics can apply to every game genre, but how they apply it would vary, as you mentioned. So yeah, so games that are more casual and rely more on ad revenue, they would be more focused on increasing the session time of the user so they can show more ads, right? So they would, and to be fair, they may also be relevant, maybe more focused on ad relevancy as well. So the click-through rates of the ads they're showing, because maybe they can use that insight to determine what type of ads they show to certain types of players. But let's say if you're, I forgot what the genre is called, but if you're a game that focuses more on in-app transactions or in-game purchases, your analytics may be focused on, how are users progressing through our sort of transaction funnels or our sort of player journeys, right? Is there any bottlenecks between this stage and that stage, right? But if you're a premium game and you rely more on game sales to make money, you may be more focused on, how's the market reacting to our game? What's the sentiment? What are people saying? So yeah, ultimately it depends on the different type of genre and also the different type of studio as well, because if you're a AAA studio, like Activision or the Fortnite studio, you probably already have, a team of data scientists that are doing some crazy stuff for you already with your data, right? But if you're an indie studio or like a mid-tier studio, you're not going to have that level of maturity in your data. So how you would use your analytics would be different to how a AAA studio would. You may be more limited to, okay, I can see what people are doing. I can maybe start to understand why players are doing certain things in my games, but I can't adopt any machine learning or AI models to optimize that, right? Whereas AAA studios are probably doing that every day in their games, right? So long answer short, analytics applies to every genre, every studio, but the applications of it would vary depending on who you are. Yeah.
I'm curious about your company. Like, what kind of games do you guys specialize in, and what kind of studios? How should I put it? Like, you mentioned, for example, Google have something called Firewall. Like, do you guys have your own software, or how do you work?
Yeah, so we do work more with the indie to mid-tier studios, mostly because those type of studios don't tend to have in-house teams that are data focused or data, like they have expertise in data, and we use a number of tools. Again, it depends on the tech stack of the studio, but most cases we use Firebase to help with our analytics, and also game analytics, the actual tool itself. Yeah.
But I would have to implement it to my game myself, and then if I were, for example, to hire your company, that data just goes to you guys, and then you guys sort of make a bullet point list of, here's the data for last month, and this is what you should do, and we think this would help, or how does that work? Like the relationship between your company and a game studio?
We do offer services that span across implementation, reporting, analysis, and optimization. But let's say in a hypothetical scenario, let's say you're a brand new studio and you haven't got any analytics in your game whatsoever. We can help you to, first of all, establish your measurement framework, establish your analytics strategy, and then we can help you scope out and implement the right tools to match your strategy. And once the tool is implemented, we don't own the data. It's still your data. But your data would be on that tool's sort of warehouse server. But it is your data, so it's not ours. And the tool, in terms of access, you would just give us like an account access to your tool, and then we can analyze the data, crunch it, do everything we need within your tool, or within could be like a data warehouse or data science tool if we need to. And then we would simply just present our analysis and findings back to you, whether it be through presentations or dashboards. Sometimes emails can be enough, depending on what the question is. And then not only do we just, give you reports and insights, we also then help you optimize your game based on those insights, which is a whole other kind of worms we can get into. But that would cover stuff like A/B testing and experimentation. that kind of stuff.
Cool.
But yeah.
And
Nice.
how, like, I imagine, like, some of our listeners are indie developers themselves. Maybe they're curious. Like, if someone were to want to work with you guys, do you have different tiers on how much it would cost, or is it a one-time fee, or is it like a subscription fee, or how does that work?
So we do have a variety of services. We do have an audit service called the Data Mastery Blueprint, and we do also have monthly services. So you pay us like a retainer, and then we sort of provide you with a certain set of services or deliverables depending on what you need help with. So we do have a retainer package around implementation, or we have another package around reporting and analysis, and another package around optimization, right? But we do also have one-off services that are focused on helping you get investment from your game. So if you're looking to, do an investor pitch and you want to sort of empower or elevate your pitch with analytics, we can help you with that. And we do also support with engineering and some data science stuff as well. So when you can get more information on our website, so Swaven Digital /services. To know and learn more about what we do.
Perfect. We'll leave that in the description.
Nice, exactly, yeah. And so I was just curious a little bit on that topic. So take Runes Games, for example. If you could do sort of a real life example, if you have any stories or postmortems you can pull from, like how does the process work from beginning, like where you get in touch, you both are interested in doing some sort of collaboration, and then going forward to collecting analytics, and then what in the end did that help to accomplish, so to speak? So what's your take on that?
Okay, so if I was to work with Rune, so I'll split my answer into two. So I'll give you the process that we usually follow, and then I'll also give you some IRL case studies of how games have used analytics to improve their game in the past. But so if I was to work with Rune, first I would understand what his goals and objectives are from like a business point of view, and then also what his goals and objectives are for his game, and then take those findings, build a measurement framework from that.
Just a follow-up question before I continue.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry for interrupting. Yeah, so if you take those goals, then could you just give an example? What could those goals be? For example, is it like I want to sell this many copies, or I want to, what are some examples that you could set as a goal for your game? Go ahead.
So a goal for your game could be, to achieve a certain number of, active users, or it could be to, securing investment could be one. Selling a game at some point could be a business goal. Attracting, a certain caliber of investment, advertisement partners. Different studios have different goals. But yeah, that's some examples.
Cool, very cool. Just proceed.
Yeah, sure. So let's say if in Rune's case, his goal is to make lots of money from his game, maybe, secure some investment one day and, become a millionaire, right? So his game is going to be focused on, okay, how can I show that my game not only has traction, it has a good level of stickiness to the game. So people are coming back, they're engaging with it, but also my game has a good monetization strategy as well, right? So his KPIs would need to focus on, okay, what's my retention rates? What's my what's my CPI? What's my LTV? What's my average revenue per user? Those kind of things you'll need to really focus on in his measurement framework. And then we would scope out which technologies or what tools he would need to capture the data that would apply to his measurement framework. So your game, Rune, is it a mobile game or is it console or PC?
Console. I would like to put it on mobile, but I haven't optimized it at all for mobile. Like I don't know if it will run. I suppose it could, because mobiles are pretty strong nowadays, or powerful.
Okay. So if you're running on console, you would probably need to use probably game analytics as your primary tool, because I think Firebase only works with mobile games. But yeah, okay. So let's say we're going with game analytics. That's our tool. Now we need to. So this is what I call instrumentation. It's going through the game experience and basically identifying what elements of the game we want to track, or what elements of the game we want to use as a trigger event or an event trigger, right? And games usually have multiple layers. You've got the main menu, you've got the in-game layer, you've got the settings. So we literally go through the whole experience, spec everything out, and then implement said tracking. Usually you would get your backend developer to implement that, but we do also provide engineers that can implement that tracking for you as well. So you'll do all that, implement the code, do some testing, some QAing, and then once that game starts being used either by a group of beta testers, or let's say if you've launched your game already, that data that is coming from that instrumentation, we would analyze it, reporting it. And again, this goes back to your measurement framework that you established in step 1, right? So
right.
How is your game performing in terms of success? So what's your LTV looking like? What's your churn rate looking like? Is it performing as per your targets? If not, why is that happening? So again, this is the next layer from just looking at what is happening, but why things are happening. And then, uncovering opportunities or ideas to improving those aspects of your game. So how can we improve LTV? How can we improve player retention? And then the last step, which is being able to optimize your game, is how do we actually implement our business decisions around improving the game, and how can we measure that those business decisions are working? So yeah, I feel like I've probably gone on a bit of a tangent, but that's how we would guide a game developer through that analytics process.
How long is that process? Months, or does that depend on what kind of level of
it depends.
Yeah, what level do you want?
Yeah, it depends on how big the game is, how complex the game is, the in-house resources of the studio. But I mean, there's no reason why a game can't go through the whole process within a couple of months. But it would depend on how fast things are moving within the company or the game studio. and simply what kind of data or what kind of tech they have, really. So
Also curious, you said you guys have engineers that can help out with the coding bit. How does that work? Do I give access to all my scripts via GitHub or something, or do they need access to my Unity project and get into my game and implement the stuff? Or is it like a Skype call where they tell me, okay, copy this script and put it in this folder, and then you call this from that? Yeah. How does that part work?
So that also depends on how involved you would like us to be. We can either show you what to do or do it for you. So if this is showing what to do, it would be the Skype call scenario. But if we are implementing that code for you, we would need access to your GitHub and your Unity project, so we can actually implement the tracking code inside of the game. So yeah.
Nice.
Wow. That's like, since I learned coding, it feels like showing your code to someone is like showing your diary, because it sort of tells people how you think. Yeah. And I'm quite embarrassed to show my code to anyone.
Yeah, I can relate. There's been times when I've maybe done like a Python script, and I've shown it to someone, and they've completely ripped apart my script. They were like, you can do this in so much easier ways, and I'm like, I don't know. I just did what I thought made sense, right? Or
But cool.
So yeah, can relate.
Yeah. Cool. And you mentioned before a little bit about empowering a pitch with analytics, for example. So say that you have built a game already. You have everything from an indie to a small team that you have built a game, and you're ready to start pitching it to publishers. You want a publisher for this game, you want to get paid for it, or you want to sell the whole property or whatever it is. So how would the process be? Like, if I had a game developed, I contact you and I want to, like, the goal is to get a publisher to pay me for like finishing the game and releasing it, for example. So how would that work usually?
So again, that would depend on how much the game studio has already done in terms of making use of their data, right? So let's say if they've already built the game and they've already implemented Firebase or GA, and they're already collecting some data, but they just don't know what to do with it, then we would come in, again, look at what that success criteria is, help you to report, analyze, and visualize your data in a way that communicates how successful your game has been so far since you built it or since you've launched it. And then also we can apply some predictive analytical techniques to show the potential your game has moving forward. So, what the potential lifetime value of your game could be, what the potential conversion rate of your game could be, what the potential revenue of your game could be, right? And those type of insights, if you integrate it into your pitch properly, can really elevate the potential of your pitch and, winning over investors.
Yeah, cool. And a follow-up question on that. So I think a lot of things that we've talked about when we have discussed like pitching to publishers, for example, on this podcast has been that you have to also show some kind of what is this game gonna cost to make, for example. So would you be also like do analytics for those sort of things, like projections, like we imagine that this game is gonna take, say, 1 year and 3 people to make, and it's gonna cost this much, and then we project it to earn perhaps this much over 5 years or something. Do you do anything like that, or is it more like QA for the gameplay itself? If you understand what I mean. Yeah. So we can definitely help you build that narrative. So
Yeah, so it's not only just about, making sure you're capturing data from your game, but actually piecing the data together in a way where your game looks attractive to investors. So going back to that cost piece, even though we may not necessarily help you capture your cost data, because that's probably something that's a bit more internal, we can definitely help you visualize and piece that data together in a way where the narrative makes sense for your pitch. So yeah.
Cool. And I think, would you like to, since we're nearing 1 hour, but I would still be interesting to hear, like, what's the future for you and the company? Like, what would you like to achieve, or is there some game that you would like to work with, or is there, like, if you can dream a little bit, well, what's the optimal scenario, so to speak?
So for us, we're just trying to just grow and build our presence in the market. We are still a very small new company, and what we're doing is very niche, right? You don't really see that many game analytics consultancies out there, right? So right now our focus is just on building our presence, spreading the awareness of game analytics, why it's important, why game developers need to pay more attention to it, and hopefully off the back of that, we can continue growing ourselves in terms of clientele and continue making a difference in the industry.
Cool. And to continue the thread of you and the company, could you tell us a little bit about how has the journey been? Like, tell us a little bit about how did this whole thing start, and how are you reaching out to game companies, and how's it going? Something like that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I was working as an in-house data analyst for a while, but it got to the point where I wanted to sort of build my own or start my own journey. So not rather than working for somebody, kind of do something for myself. So I thought, game developers would be a good clientele because of my personal interest in gaming. As we mentioned before we started recording, I used to compete in Call of Duty at like a semi-pro level. I've grown up playing video games, so gaming is a part of me, right? So I started Swaven Digital as basically a sweet spot between what I'm good at versus what I have a passion for, and also what is in high demand at the moment in terms of the marketplace, right? Because I think we can all agree that data is the new meta. I've heard that quite a lot. Doing data is the new oil. All those kind of statements. So yeah, I just want to help game studios use that new meta, right? And how it started was it was a bit scrappy. I'll be honest. I had to approach some game studios on LinkedIn. At first, it started off as, "Hey, let me interview you because I want to understand more about the game developer space and how you guys view data and how you use it." And then on the back of one of those interviews, which were actually paid, by the way, I would pay the interviewee. Yeah, so I'd offer like £100 to speak to them for an hour. But off the back of one of those interviews, the person actually turned around and said, "Hey, like, we actually need help with our analytics. Let's hire you for this project." And at the time, they were building a new game, and they wanted to secure some investment for that game. But they had no idea or no clue what to do in terms of, using any data or any analytics. So I came in, built them that framework, helped them to implement our Firebase, and then helped them to, report, visualize, and use that data in the investment pitch, which they were then able to secure. It was a Series B investment, so they were quite happy about that.
Nice.
I don't know what Series B investment mean, but
Series B it's the level above Series A. So I think they already had some investment before, but this was like the next level of investment.
Okay.
Basically, yeah.
Nice.
So, and then off the back of that, we kind of used them as a case study, and use that to attract some more clients through email marketing, LinkedIn outreach, and the rest is history. So, yeah.
Cool. Very cool.
Congrats on the success so far. It's awesome to hear people quit their jobs and try to chase their own dream, and the rough start and all that. It's perfect.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, very, very cool. Nice. So, just something about yourself then. Could you just tell us what kind of games do you like yourself, and what do you play, and tell us a little bit about that.
So I am predominantly a first-person shooter gamer. So I do like my Call of Duty.
Right. Since exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So I have been playing a lot of the MW3 game. I think this COD might be one of my favorite CODs, to be honest. I didn't enjoy last year's game that much, but this game, based on the playtime alone, I think it's been one of my most played CODs since launch. So definitely enjoying MW3. I do also play a lot of Destiny 2 as well. I think that's a pretty cool game. I play FIFA as well once in a while. And I do also play chess as well.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
So, I've got to ask though, since you work with analytics and you play these types of games, like how damaged are you from your work playing these games? Like, are you constantly thinking about it every time you kill someone in Call of Duty? You're thinking like, oh, that was logged somewhere, and I go around this corner. Like, does that mess with you when you play games?
I'll say not as much. Because when I'm gaming, I'm in full on enjoyment mode. I'm not trying to stress about nothing. I'm just I'm just here to smoke the other person on the other team. I don't care about anything else. But I do sometimes wonder, like how companies are responding to their player base, using some potential form of analytics, right? So I'll give you an example. Call of Duty MW3, I'd say they've actually done a really good job at listening to their player feedback and adopting their game accordingly, right? Because one of the things that was complained about a lot in the last game was the movement system. It was very clunky. It wasn't as fluid, and you couldn't slide cancel. I think that was one of the big things that people didn't like. So in this game, Modern Warfare 3, they've basically done all those things. Like they've tweaked the things that people were complaining about from the last game, and even post launch, they've even fixed things like weapon balancing, game bugs, spawn system, all based from player feedback post launch. I think they even did like a testing session where they invited some pro players to come to their studio and play the game, and took their feedback on board and implemented some changes in the game off the back of that as well. So as a game analyst, I do sort of pay attention to those kind of things and think to myself, oh, that's cool. Okay, they're actually doing a good job of that, you know? So yeah, that's kind of my experience of gaming as a game analyst, I guess I could say.
Cool.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. Okay, so I think since we are a little bit over an hour, I think we maybe should start wrapping it up. But before we do that, I would like to give you the chance to just plug everything you want, like where should we send our listeners, where can they find out more about your service, anything else you want to say, or where we should send them.
Yeah, of course, yes. So, we do have a website called Swayven Digital. So that's SWAYVEN, then digital.com. And we're also on LinkedIn. Again, you can type my business name, or you can type me in, Anthon Fynn-Williams in LinkedIn. And yeah, you'll find me. Unfortunately, I'm not on Twitter because I don't, I'm not on social media that much, and Twitter is just a bit too much for me right now. But I am on LinkedIn. And I will be doing a webinar soon as well, talking about my game analytics mastery framework. So yeah, stay tuned for that as well.
Cool. Very cool. Yeah, I'm so glad to have you on the show. It was really fun when you reached out that you also listened to the show. So I'm happy that we provide some value and that there is people actually out there who listen. So that's really, really fun. Super nice. And I really hope to do a couple of follow-up episodes because I think there's lots of things that you could touch on regarding analytics. I mean, everything from ethics to like the actual nitty-gritty. What can I do with it and what can I accomplish and so on. So super interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be happy to jump on here again. It's been a pleasure talking to you guys about, game development and game analytics. I can tell you're very passionate about what you do, and it's nice to speak to people that are actually involved and are actually on a game development journey themselves, right? So yeah, keep doing your stuff. You guys are great, and yeah, it was a pleasure.
Thank you, so kind. All right. Yes. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Anthon, for being our guest. Thank you so much, Rune, for being my amazing co-host as always. And thank you for listening. So we'll see you next week with another interesting guest, I think. Thank you again, and see you next week. Bye-bye.
See you. Bye.